Hello and welcome to this episode of the Network Insights series. For those that are new to Network Insights, essentially this is your opportunity to listen in to some of our great conversations with the amazing people who make up our network, and for them to share insights into their work in supporting people to be more physically active. Today's episode is going to focus in on taking whole systems approaches, however with the added specificity of the school environment. So, without further ado, to hand over for today's session, taking a whole schools approach to promoting physical activity, I'll hand over to Elaine to get us started.
I am absolutely delighted to welcome today Anna Chalkley. So Anna and I worked together while I was at the BHF National Centre, but she's gone on to bigger and better and greater things since then. So well done, Anna. And I just wanted to kick off really to describe, if you could describe a little bit of your career path, because it's been really fascinating.
It's not one that's necessarily been intentional. I say that because purely I love doing what I do. So I guess, as you said, started off at the BHF National Centre for Physical Activity and Health at Loughborough University. So joined there fresh from doing my master's degree. And my role initially when I joined the centre was actually working with Kim Buxton in primary care. So as project officer for primary care. But very soon after that, found my feet in terms of children and young people. So I worked very closely with Sonia McGeorge and Angela Newport within the children and young people team there. And obviously, but for those that aren't familiar with the National Centre, our role really was a knowledge translation centre. So our agenda was to try and put physical activity higher on the health agenda. And we did that by collating, synthesising evidence related to physical activity and health, and produced resources, toolkits, training for practitioners and professionals promoting physical activity. So children and young people was very much an area passionate of mine, particularly working with schools. Yeah. And after, I think it was 12 years of working at the National Centre, what I came to realise was when I first started there, obviously it was an interest of mine, but I didn't really have the vocabulary for things like knowledge translation or implementation science or implementation research. And as I became more interested and more involved in that, I guess the natural next step for me was to do my own PhD. So I started a PhD within the School of Sport, Exercise and Health Sciences at Loughborough University, looking at implementation of a school-based physical activity programme.
That was the Kids Marathon.
Kids Marathon, renamed Marathon Kids. So that was, I think at the time, there was a lot in the press around active mile programmes, and I think we may have been slightly ahead of the curve in terms of it being a new genre of physical activity initiative for schools. But what I was really interested in was that we had this initiative that was being, widely kind of endorsed by the government as something that schools should take up, and as a way that to help schools meet that obesity policy of 30 minutes of in-school moderate to vigorous physical activity for every child. But that we didn't have very little information on actually effectiveness, but no information at all in terms of how schools should be doing this. So that's something that I really wanted to focus on in my PhD. And I think you could probably, in terms of the findings, substitute, Marathon Kids with any other type of physical activity initiative in school in terms of implementation is actually quite complex. Schools are complex settings, and what we found was that there are a multitude of kind of interrelated factors that influenced implementation. I think really the main takeaway message from that is that adaptation, so regardless of any kind of physical activity initiative or programme, adaptations are actually essential to make sure that it's suitable for the context within which it's being implemented, but particularly for sustainability. If we want something to work, we have to allow those that are implementing it enough flexibility and freedom and autonomy, I think, to adapt strategies to suit their individual needs and circumstances.
But what I find interesting about that statement is a combination of things. There's partially the type of work you do, and you've gone on to, and we'll talk a bit more about what you've gone on to do. I mean, Anna Campbell uses the term pracademic, and for me, I think that beautifully describes, because there are some, having worked in that academic environment, there are some people who are pure scientists. There's no doubt about it. That's what they do. It's their job, and sometimes that adaptation therefore gets lost in the system. Because they have a very fixed intervention that they implement. But then when you try and basically broaden that out to other settings or other places, it becomes a real challenge. So I think that, that real world science, that interpretation of science, it's not an easy thing to do, which is why sometimes people veer away from it. So I applaud you for doing it, because I know it's not an easy thing to do. But from your perspective, because a lot of the people that listen to this are not academics, but they're wanting to learn, they're wanting to adapt what they do, they want to they want to do the best job they can and understand what works and what doesn't work. And have you got any sort of thoughts around that, and how that can work in terms of the implementation side of it and making it happen?
I think a very important message is probably that there is no one size fits all, and I don't think we can solve the problem on our own. I think, certainly the ethos that I have from working at the BHF National Centre is that something I try to do, and something I encourage others to think about, is that research, policy and practice shouldn't work in silos. They should inform each other and be informed by each other. And so I think collaboration, co-development, co-production, whatever you want to call it, and they do have sort of distinctions, is really important. And so I think engaging with other people, widening our networks, being open to new ways of thinking, asking critical questions, challenging ourselves, I think is really important, and it's really the only way that we will learn, develop, come up with new innovative ideas and actually solve the problems that make a difference in the real world.
Great. Yeah, no, I agree. And in terms of that Marathon Kids now program, what were some of the outputs that came from that? I mean, you've talked about being adaptable, but presumably there is a product, a program that sits behind this. What does that look and feel like now? How has it moved on from probably where it started from?
Yeah, so Marathon Kids is very similar to a lot of other school-based active mile initiatives that are out there, but differs in terms of a couple of key things. So unlike, for example, the Daily Mile, which takes place during curriculum time, Marathon Kids usually takes place during recess, break time or lunchtime. And it challenges, as the name suggests, children, pupils to complete the equivalent distance of a marathon over a whole school year. So within that, there are a few kind of key components that make it distinct from other programmes in terms of it using tracking, goal setting, role modelling, celebration and rewards. Those are the kind of 5 pillars that underpin the programme. And so based on some of the work that I did and some of the feedback that was collected from both teachers, marathon champions, but also pupils, what they've tried to do now is to kind of streamline some of the resources and tools that they offer as part of the programme. So previously, the way that they tracked and recorded the distance that pupils ran was based on a lap band method. So every lap that pupils ran, they collected a lap band, which was counted up and during afternoon registration recorded in a database. They've now, I think, as technology tends to move on and is applied in many different circumstances, they've tried to automate a lot of that. So they've now used a scanning system, a barcode scanning system, which is much more practical and feasible than having lots of elastic bands going everywhere in the playground. And there's an app as well. So one of the things that they've tried to do is to integrate the school programme with their community-based programme. What we found, or what I found during my PhD, was actually that Marathon Kids was very successful in giving children the motivation, the awareness, the confidence really, to look at other opportunities to be active outside of the school. I think that was one of the biggest bits of learning for Marathon Kids. And so through this app, what they're trying to do now is reward participation, whether that be school-based participation or actually participation outside the home. And what they've found is that there's now a lot more participation among families as a result of that app, either through children becoming exposed to marathon kids and physical activity through schools and then wanting to look at opportunities at the weekend, or vice versa. You know, a child will go along with their sibling or their family member to a park event, and actually the parent will go into school and say, are you aware that there is this program that you can actually do it within school? So it's worked both ways, and I think they've gone, you know, from strength to strength.
It's really good to see something that's a kind of catalyst for that broader involvement in an activity beyond the school gates, I suppose, for want of a better way. And I suppose you've gone on to then look at that whole school approach a little bit more, haven't you, in terms of the work that you're doing now?
Yeah. So the work that you're referring to is the Creating Active School framework that I've been involved with Andy Daly-Smith at Bradford University. And Creating Active School, you know, we talked about the importance of collaboration and co-development. That was very much, again, the ethos that Creating Active School was built upon. So Creating Active Schools is a framework which has outlined what a whole school approach to physical activity looks like. And this was co-developed by 50 different stakeholders, representing Yorkshire region, but also from national organisations and international researchers as well. So a whole wealth of knowledge and experience and expertise have gone into the creation of the framework. And what makes this different to other frameworks, because there have been, you know, whole school approach to physical activity isn't a new concept, it's something that's been around for decades. But with Creating Active Schools, what we have now is an agreed framework based on or underpinned by behaviour change theory, looking at a whole systems approach to physical activity. This was developed back in 2019, and essentially what we had was a very nice, pretty picture, colourful picture on a page of a framework. And what we've been working really hard to do now is to try and build an implementation model. So actually trying to help schools in terms of how do you translate that framework into practice and create some of the assets that will help implementation. So Andy's been spearheading that work in Bradford with the local delivery pilot there. And the point we've got to now is that we have developed a whole range of online CPD for teachers that will be able to access from September this year. It's very much practice led. It's not us trying to, you know, sell a product and go out there and as researchers tell schools what they should be doing. It's very much led by the schools themselves. So it's kind of grown organically, and as what tends to happen is the research is trying to play catch up. So practice has kind of, you know, told us that there is this need and this demand for creating active schools, and now what we're trying to do is actually trying to capture what that looks like in practice, but try and understand what are the immediate short-term kind of effects of creating active schools.
Okay, it's interesting because obviously back in the day we produced, Sonia was involved in producing some resources for schools, and when I was based in Wales we spent a lot of time promoting the Healthy Schools project as well as part of that. So we've had some of these before, and what I found a bit of a shame is, having spoken to some partners out there, quite a lot of that seems to have been lost somewhere along the way. And I don't know if it's just that the environment of schools has changed, or whether, and therefore these things do need a refresh every so often to bring it back, or whether it's just that teachers have moved on and that experience and knowledge has gone with them, or whatever it is. I don't know if what have you found while you're out there in terms of some of the challenges that these schools have had, in implementing some of these things?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? And I think it's probably, in truth, a combination of those different factors, in that, schools, like other organisations, don't exist in a vacuum, in a bubble. The context is constantly kind of changing and evolving, and practitioners and researchers, that's a challenge that we have to try and overcome and catch up with, isn't it? But again, working with schools, some of the schools involved in creating active schools at the moment have kind of said, look, we've got these resources and these toolkits and things that we've had before. And I think as a country and within the UK, we've kind of suffered a little bit in terms of we have a history of being reliant on individual initiatives. And schools are excellent at saying yes and taking on board new things, but I think they just don't have the bandwidth, the capacity to keep saying yes. And quite often these single initiatives are, you know, maybe delivered in a school for half a term, based on the goodwill of you know, a champion or an ambassador. And I think what we really need to do now is move towards a system and have a bit of a shift in the narrative in terms of thinking about physical activity promotion at that individual level, to actually thinking about how we embed physical activity as part of everyday practice in school. And, you know, we talk about working in a systems-based way, and I think that's part of the change. It's that small kind of drip feed of culture change that takes place over time, and a long period of time. You know, it doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen within 1 or 2 year cycle. We're talking kind of 5, 7, 10 year period of change to actually have the level of change and effect on culture that we're wanting.
So it is interesting about that, it taking time. We hear that often, and sometimes like it's baby steps to get to somewhere. I mean, from your perspective, you talked about the fact that, you know, in the next phases we have the framework. Let's look at how we start implementing it. What sort of resources and training and so forth are the schools crying out to be able to implement this?
So creating active schools, essentially, what we do is we take schools through a 4-stage annual cycle, and that cycle begins with essentially profiling the school's current provision. So within the Creating Active School framework, we have 4 main areas that we work with, which are policy, environment, which is the physical environment, but also the social environment of the school, stakeholders, and that can be within school, but also wider stakeholders external to the school, and then 7 different opportunity areas, so things like active travel or recess or PE. And I said before that we've been developing assets to help implementation, and one of those is the online CPD. So we have 22 modules that cover those 4 different areas within the framework that schools can go on. They can complete the profiling tool, and what that will give them is a picture of really where they're at in terms of those different areas within the framework, but also then help them to identify priority areas to work on in the next academic year. Mm-hmm. Importantly, I think what CAS does, which is different, is that it helps schools adopt a data-driven approach to decision making. So it links in with the school improvement plan. So we're embedding right at the very heart of the school physical activity in terms of what schools can be working on, and then we're providing the tools and resources and support to help them do that. So there's the online CPD, there's the tracker which they can use to keep a record of their progress over the academic year, but they're supported by a Creating Active School facilitator who sits at the locality level, and really their role is to develop a community of practice within the locality level so that schools can be supported individually but also collectively. So we're very much around trying to embed that monitoring and evaluation into that annual cycle, so that schools can learn what works, what doesn't for them in their own individual context, but they can also share ideas and learning from other schools as well within their locality.
Brilliant. So they've got a wraparound support for them. And yeah. I mean, you're saying this is all coming out in September. If people want to get involved in it, how's that going to work? Is it just you join the network? Is there a fee for it? Have you got that far in your thinking in terms of?
So there's a website that people can go onto and access and have a look, which is www.creatingactiveschools.org. Right. The delivery partner for this is the Active Partnership Network. So Creating Active Schools is led by the University of Bradford in partnership with Yorkshire Sport Foundation and Bradford Teaching Hospital Foundation Trust. And Active Partnerships is the local delivery arm for this. So I would recommend going onto the website to have a look, or contacting the local Active Partnership who will be able to tell you about Creating Active Schools in your local area.
Great, thanks. We'll pop that in our, when we put this out, we'll make sure that the link is put into the information so that people can get access to that. It's interesting because you're not just working in Yorkshire, as it were, are you? You're actually employed by a university in Norway, aren't you? And I know that you've done lots of broader work around WHO and HEPA and some of the European areas as well. And so I'm just intrigued how all of that works. How do you make that?
Yeah,
and are there any differences to Norway's delivery to what happens here, I suppose?
I mean, the commute is awful, but no, it's an interesting, and I think it's probably one of the opportunities that has come out of COVID, if I'm honest, in terms of that remote working and being able to have a setup that allows me to be based in the UK, but also have the benefit of working in another country. So my current role is as a research fellow at the Centre for Physically Active Learning at Western Norway University of Applied Sciences. To tell you what physically active learning is, it's the integration of physical activity or movement within the delivery of academic content. So the centre, SEFAL, for a number of years has developed a web-based and in-person CPD programme for teachers around physically active learning at the master's level. And my role is to look at some of the data that's being collected as part of that to really understand how we can help to build teachers' capability, opportunity and motivation to use physically active learning within schools, within their practice. And so that is very nicely kind of tied in with the work we're doing around creating active schools, given that physically active learning is one of the 7 opportunity areas within the framework. One of the big projects that I'm working on at the moment is an Erasmus Plus funded project called Activate. www.activateyourclass.eu is the website, but that is a consortium of 6 different European countries who have come together to create a European curriculum around physically active learning. So Norway, very, very lucky to be able to have the opportunity to work in Norway and look at and try and understand their educational system and how that creates opportunities in terms of physical activity and to be able to bring that learning back to the UK. So through Activate, what we've done is taken some of the learning, some of the good practice around how we develop teachers' pedagogical practice for physical activity, but apply that on a European-wide context, on a European level. So we've developed a national curriculum for physically active learning, which is targeting both in-service teachers, but also teachers undergoing initial teacher training, because we know to try and get the biggest bang for our buck, the earlier we can have an influence in terms of teachers training and teachers exposure to delivering physical activity, the better, the more confident and competent they are at doing that. It's much harder to actually change practice when you've been doing something for a very long time. Associated with that, as well as the curriculum, what we've done is also developed an e-learning package. So if we have the teacher educators working in higher education who are delivering an undergraduate or postgraduate teaching qualification or course, they can actually pick up and use the material that we've developed to do that. So that's probably one of the major projects that I've been working on as part of SEFAL at the moment.
So by physically active learning, I'm just trying to get my head around this. It's not just about the normal type PE lessons or teaching activity or encouraging activity. Is around using maths and other elements. Is that correct? So you could make a maths lesson more active, for example, by, I know there was somebody I used to work with that was really interested in this area, and he used to set up games where you'd run to somewhere and then you had to add there were dots on the ground, and you had to add the dots up to run back and forth to make up the number that you were given. So you were adding a maths opportunity into an activity opportunity. Is that kind of thing you're looking at? Sorry, absolutely. That's a very crude example, probably.
No, that's absolutely the sort of thing that we're looking at. And one of the things that's really interesting, actually, looking at, so one of the things I've been doing is looking at how physically active learning is understood and used by teachers in different country contexts. And the difference is actually quite diverse. And I think we're still, developing our understanding about what physically active learning is and looks like. And it can be, there are different kind of interpretations of that, but it can be anything from brain breaks, so just using an opportunity to break up sedentary behaviour, to stand up from the desk and do an activity. It could be where academic content is integrated to the physical activity, so as you said, and so another example would be that's quite often used in science is reenacting the solar system out on the playground, looking at revolution and rotation of the planets within the solar system. So I think the byproduct, if you like, of physically active learning is physical activity. But actually, one of the interesting conversations we've been having is it just purely a better way to teach? How can we support our teachers and entrust our teachers to use their own judgment about when to use physically active learning? Because actually, children just get it better by being active.
And I think, in the same way as we end up sat down for long periods of time at our desks, it can happen to children as well. So that breaking up of sedentary behaviour. I know when I was in Wales, we, and I wish I could remember the name of the pack, it was developed in Holland originally. And we developed it for primary schools in Wales. And it essentially was those activity breaks. So there was a puppet game and you'd all pretend to be puppets, and there were gate songs to sing. And so it was that getting kids moving and breaking up that behaviour. So whether it's still out there, it must be there somewhere. But yeah, it was really well received by the schools. The other thing that strikes me is, and I do talk about this quite a lot, and it's that physical activity by stealth, which, as you know, we had a conference at the BHF Centre, God, how many years ago was that now? And I think we were a wee bit ahead of the time, because I remember it was quite a difficult concept for a lot of people to grasp at the time, I think. But more and more I'm seeing, I don't know, maybe I'm looking out for them, I'm seeing examples of that where physical activity is in a sense a byproduct of as you said, of the actual learning experience. So it's great to see those opportunities be woven in, because I suspect there are a lot of children out there. And I've been watching recently, there's a playground opposite me, and I find it a bit sad, actually, because the boys were, I have to say, jumping up and down on the roof of the changing rooms the other day, but there we are. But they weren't active, if I give them that. I was hoping that it wasn't rusty and one of them wasn't going to fall through it, but anyway. But the girls were sat down at the bus stop just outside watching them, and I keep thinking, here we go again. And this has happened a few times. I've passed that place, and the guys are playing basketball and the girls are sat around, still engaging and connecting, but not being active. So it's that way of trying to find a way into it. I wanted to still go up to them and say, come on, let's go and do something. Probably would have looked at me as if it was daft, but there you go. So there is that, by doing it by stealth, it obviously there's a way of levering it in for people and making it and doing it without them knowing, really, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah, it's interesting. So the Norway, going back to the Norwegian kind of context, their national curriculum has elements of physical activity really as a red thread within it. It very much looks at children in a holistic viewpoint, a holistic way. So it's about building some of what we would usually call those softer skills in terms of social skills and team working and team building and that sort of thing. But it's really gives the teachers the autonomy and the control to actually decide how best to achieve those outcomes. As researchers, we're very often focused in on MVPA as the single outcome, that we're interested in, but actually, there is so many other benefits to physical activity, and particularly co-benefits in terms of education, that maybe we need to shift our thinking in terms of what it is we actually value as an output.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, and being able to combine the two areas together, so you're hitting two birds with one stone effectively, aren't you? You're getting that activity hit, you're getting that learning element, so it's really important. And some of this work, I mean, the work that you do, you've been heavily involved with, as I said, with some of the WHO staff and HEPA, Health Enhancing Physical Activity Networks. How does some of this work that you do translate out across other countries?
Yeah, so we're just about to embark on a piece of work actually at the moment with WHO, looking at what does a whole school system approach to physical activity look like in different countries across the European context. So we will be doing some stakeholder mapping, looking at trying to understand what the system looks like in different countries. Who are the different stakeholders involved who have a role to play. And trying to create some resources, some assets around that to look at how we scale, a whole school approach to physical activity across Europe. So that was part of a piece of work, a project that we were developing as part of the Children and Young People working group within HEPA Europe network. So there's lots of opportunities to kind of transfer the learning of what we're doing within the UK around creating active schools, but also bringing in some of the work from Activate, for example. So one of the next projects we'll be looking at is Activate 2.0, looking to secure some more funding to see how do we, again, integrate physically active learning as part of a whole school approach. That's the missing piece of the jigsaw at the moment that we have within the Activate project. But again, it's this move towards not just looking at things in isolation, but trying to think of the holistic picture and how we support schools to think more broadly in terms of their provision.
To finish off, you've got all this experience and all this learning that you've accumulated over the years. Have you got any, I suppose, top tips? I know it's difficult because, as you said, every school is different, but there are some things that you think people need to consider when they're wanting to work with schools, wanting to work in schools to raise physical activity. What sort of things would you suggest they need to think about first?
Gosh, that's a good question. So I think the first thing that that I would say is that we're seeing at the moment, and this is in a post-COVID world, schools' ability to actually engage in new things is severely limited at the moment. And I think, there's a lot of focus on post-COVID catch-up and recovery in schools. And I think we need to be sensitive to some of the demands, I think, on teachers' time and schools' capacity to be able to get involved and engaged in these sorts of things. It's not for the want of, because they're not interested, because they are. It's just, I think we need to think about how we can help them to maybe use physical activity to achieve some of their priorities and their objectives, which have kind of taken over in a post-COVID world. So I think that would be the first thing. But also to, as I said, to try and work within that kind of holistic way, within that systems approach and locality-based approach. It's something that's become increasingly important. I think something that's being valued and pushed by Department of Education, for example, to work within that way. And part of that is understanding who the key players are, who the other stakeholders are, who you can work with. I think it's a case of, not thinking about going alone, but actually looking to see, who are the partners out there that you can collaborate with, who would have an interest in that work, and what value does it bring to the school.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thank you very much, Anna. It's been great chatting to you, as it always is. But it's really nice to home in on your areas of interest, and this is the first time we've really looked at children in one of these areas in terms of promoting it to younger people. So it's really good to hear some of your ideas, and hopefully people who are listening to this will get some ideas to get them started on their journey of supporting schools, or maybe already involved and they want some ideas. And we will definitely link it, put the link up if you let us know when it comes out. We can, when the resources are available, we'll definitely add that to the our links. So thank you again, and yeah, great to chat to you, and have a good day.
Thank you for the invitation.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for taking the time to watch this episode in the Network Insights series. I hope you found it both insightful and informative. For more information on other episodes in the series, please visit our dedicated page, moveconsulting.co.uk/network-insights. And please do follow further links in that page to find out more about Move Consulting and our offer to support you in helping people to move more often. So that's it. Until next month, take care, and we'll see you soon.